You'd think after 10 years of marriage, I'd have a solid grasp on who my wife, Savannah, really was. But let me tell you, there's nothing quite like hearing the woman you share a bed with muttering sweet nothings to someone else in her sleep. It wasn't the first time she'd talked in her sleep, but it was the first time she said a name that wasn't mine. Elliot, she whispered, almost tenderly, like a secret she didn't mean to share. And just like that, the veil of normalcy in my life started to unravel. At first, I tried to laugh it off. People dream weird things, right? I mean, I once dreamed I was married to Oprah and living in a mansion made of pancakes. But as the days passed, the name Elliot hung over me like a storm cloud. It wasn't just the name, though. It was the way she said it. Soft, longing, like it wasn't a dream, but a memory. Things didn't add up. Savannah's schedule had grown increasingly erratic. Business trips that used to be occasional became frequent. Weekend getaways with friends cropped up out of nowhere. I told myself I was being paranoid, but paranoia has a nasty way of worming into your thoughts and nesting there, demanding answers. The breaking point came when I stumbled across her planner. Savannah was meticulous, always jotting down meetings, reminders, and itineraries in her neat little handwriting. As I flipped through the pages, I saw it. Elliott Bay circled on a random Tuesday. I froze. That wasn't a name. It was a place, a waterfront spot in Seattle we'd visited years ago on vacation. The irony hit me like a ton of bricks. My wife had been dreaming about someone named Elliot, and now there was a note pointing straight to Elliott Bay. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, but my gut told me otherwise. That gnawing feeling you get when you're on the verge of uncovering something terrible? Yeah, that was me. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I decided to dig deeper, convinced there was something hidden behind her dreamy whispers and her carefully curated calendar. What I found next was the first crack in the facade of our marriage, and it left me wondering if I was ready to see what lay behind it. After that night, I couldn't look at Savannah the same way. Every laugh, every casual touch, every I love you carried an invisible asterisk. The name Elliot lingered like smoke in a room you couldn't quite air out. But I didn't want to be that guy, the insecure husband who accuses his wife over a dream. So I waited, observed, and inevitably the cracks began to show. It started small, a missed call on her phone from an unlisted number, a work dinner that ran suspiciously late. Then one Saturday, while cleaning out the car, I found the receipt, a crumpled slip of paper tucked between the seats, from a boutique hotel I didn't recognize. The date was only 3 weeks ago, a night she'd told me she was at a conference mixer. Except this hotel was miles away from the supposed event venue. I stared at the receipt like it was a piece of evidence from a crime scene. Room service for two. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, and a dessert labeled chocolate temptation. Ironic, considering the temptation she seemed to be indulging in. Still, I told myself it wasn't enough to confront her. What if she'd shared the meal with a colleague? What if it was innocent? But the more I tried to rationalize, the louder that gnawing voice in my head became. So, I did what any self-respecting, half-crazy man on the verge of a nervous breakdown would do. I started keeping tabs. Her work calendar became my Bible. I noted every meeting, every trip, every evening with the girls. I'd peek at her planner whenever she wasn't looking, cross-referencing it with her credit card statements and phone activity. It didn't take long to notice a pattern. Every couple of weeks, there was a dinner, a booking, or a charge that didn't quite fit the narrative. And then, the name Elliot resurfaced, not in her sleep this time, but in her emails. One night, while Savannah showered, her laptop pinged with a notification. I shouldn't have looked, but my curiosity had already overtaken my morals. The email was from Elliott Bay Suites, confirming a reservation for next Thursday. A suite for 2. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just the name. It was the familiarity. She had used her personal email address, not her work one. The kind of casual, confident move you make when you think no one's watching. Well, guess what, Savannah? I was watching. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced with questions, anger, and a sick sense of curiosity. Who was Elliot? What was happening at Elliott Bay? And how long had she been weaving this intricate web of lies? I knew I needed proof, something concrete, undeniable. The email was a breadcrumb, but I wanted the whole trail. And so, I made a plan. If she was heading to Elliott Bay next Thursday, then so was I. Little did I know, the truth waiting for me there would shatter more than just my trust. By the time Thursday rolled around, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. I'd spent the days leading up to it in a haze of paranoia, swinging between doubt and certainty. What if I was wrong? What if this was all some elaborate misunderstanding, and I was about to destroy my marriage over a coincidence? But every time I looked at the receipt, or replayed her whispered Elliot in my mind, I felt that same sinking sensation in my gut. Whatever I was about to uncover, I knew it wasn't good. That morning, Savannah left the house dressed to kill. She claimed she had an all-day client meeting followed by a team dinner. I nodded, forcing a smile, while my chest burned with the weight of the lie. The moment she pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed the bag I'd packed the night before and set out for Elliott Bay. I'd never been to the Suites before, but as I pulled up to the waterfront property, I could see why she'd chosen it. The place was gorgeous, sleek modern architecture perched on the edge of the water, with panoramic views of the bay. It was the kind of place you'd pick for a romantic getaway, not a business trip. My stomach churned. I parked far enough away to avoid being spotted and made my way inside. The lobby was as polished as the exterior, with soft jazz playing in the background and a front desk that gleamed under warm lights. I approached casually, pretending to check my phone, and glanced at the reservation list on the desk. Sure enough, there it was, Savannah, room 312. My hands clenched into fists at the sight of her name. Now came the hard part. I couldn't exactly stroll up to the room and knock. Instead, I found a seat in the lobby with a clear view of the elevators and waited. Time crawled by as I tried to look nonchalant, sipping a coffee I didn't want and pretending to scroll through my phone. Every time the elevator doors opened, my heart skipped a beat. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she appeared. Savannah stepped out of the elevator with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, clean-cut, and dressed in a way that screamed effortless charm. They were laughing, heads close together like they were sharing a private joke. My heart plummeted. This was it, the confirmation I didn't want but couldn't avoid. She wasn't here for work. She was here for him. I followed at a distance as they left the hotel and walked toward the waterfront. They strolled along the promenade, stopping at a small cafe where they shared a bottle of wine. Every gesture between them, the way he touched her arm, the way she leaned into him, was a knife to my chest. But I couldn't stop watching. I needed to see it all, to understand the full extent of her betrayal. After the cafe, they returned to the hotel, disappearing back into room 312. I stood outside, staring at the closed door, torn between rage and despair. Part of me wanted to kick it down, to confront them right then and there. But another part, the rational part, knew I needed to stay calm. If I exploded now, I'd lose any chance of getting the answers I needed. I retreated to the parking lot, sitting in my car as the sun set over the bay. My mind raced with questions. Who was this man? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed in the car, watching the hotel, waiting for them to emerge. My plan was simple. Follow them, document everything, and confront Savannah when I had all the evidence. But as the hours passed, I began to realize that this wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about reclaiming control over a life that had spiraled into chaos. When dawn broke, I was still there, ready to see what the new day would bring. The sun was barely cresting over the horizon when the hotel door opened again. I straightened in my seat, my pulse racing. Savannah stepped out first, wearing the same clothes as yesterday, but now her hair was disheveled and her makeup smudged, details that made my stomach churn. The man followed close behind, his hand brushing the small of her back as they walked toward the car they'd parked nearby. They looked comfortable, intimate, like a couple savoring the remnants of a perfect night. I thought I was prepared for anything, but what I saw next pushed me past the edge of reason. As they loaded into the car, he leaned over and kissed her, slow and deliberate, as if they had all the time in the world. She didn't pull away. In fact, she smiled after, a warm, contented smile I hadn't seen on her face in months. It wasn't just the kiss. It was the ease of it, the casual way they touched, as if I had never existed in her life. As if the last 10 years of marriage had been a convenient lie. My chest tightened, a storm of emotions raging inside me. I wasn't just hurt. I was enraged. This wasn't some fleeting fling. This was something deeper, something that had roots. And in that moment, all my restraint crumbled. I stepped out of the car and marched toward them, my fists clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. They didn't notice me at first. They were too absorbed in their little bubble of stolen romance. But when I was within earshot, Savannah turned, her eyes widening in shock. The color drained from her face. The man, Elliot, I assumed, looked confused at first, then wary as I closed the distance. He must have seen the fury in my eyes, because he raised his hands in a defensive gesture, muttering something I didn't bother processing. My focus was locked on him, the architect of my humiliation. I couldn't hear Savannah's panicked voice or feel her trying to grab my arm. All I could see was him. I didn't hit him. Not yet. Instead, I slammed my hand on the hood of the car, the loud thud breaking through the tension like a gunshot. "Get out," I growled, my voice low and trembling with suppressed rage. Elliot froze, his face pale. Savannah tried to step between us, but I shot her a look that must have spoken volumes because she stopped, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. My gaze returned to Elliot. "You think you can just waltz into my life and take what's mine?" I spat, my voice shaking but firm. He stammered, trying to explain, to justify, but I wasn't interested in his excuses. The frustration, the humiliation, the months of doubt and betrayal, it all boiled over. But even in my rage, I knew there were limits. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a physical fight that would only escalate the situation. Instead, I leaned in close so only he could hear. "Walk away now," I said, my tone icy. "Because if you don't, you'll wish you had." Elliot hesitated for a moment, glancing at Savannah, who was now on the verge of tears. Whatever unspoken agreement passed between them, it ended with him backing away and retreating to the driver's side of the car. "I didn't know she was married," he muttered, as if that absolved him. I didn't respond. I just watched him leave, my fist still trembling with the effort it took to hold back. As the car pulled away, Savannah tried to speak, her words a mix of apologies and pleas. I didn't want to hear it. "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Not now. Not here." I walked away before she could say another word, leaving her standing alone in the hotel parking lot. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, pain, betrayal. But one thing was clear: this wasn't over. Walking away from that parking lot felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done. Every fiber of my being screamed to stay, to unleash every ounce of anger I had. But deep down, I knew this moment needed to breathe. I couldn't fully process what had just happened, let alone deal with Savannah's excuses or explanations. So I left her there, standing in the shadow of her betrayal, while I drove back home in silence. The drive was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might snap, my mind replaying the scene over and over. Her face when she saw me, the way she froze, caught in her lie, and Elliot, his smug retreat like he thought he could slink away from the chaos he'd helped create. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something colder, sharper, a determination to not just walk away, but to reclaim control over what had spiraled out of my hands. When I got home, I didn't even bother unpacking my bag. I went straight to my office, the one place in the house that felt like mine, and sat in the dark for what felt like hours. My mind oscillated between questions and plans. How long had this been going on? How could she lie so easily? And most importantly, what was I going to do next? By the time Savannah came home, it was past midnight. I heard her tentative footsteps in the hallway, the way she hesitated outside my office door before finally opening it. She didn't speak right away, just stood there, waiting for me to acknowledge her. I didn't. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring in my vision. She started, but I raised a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said, my voice low but firm. "Not tonight." She tried again, stumbling over apologies and justifications, but I wasn't ready to hear them. Instead, I got up and walked past her, leaving her alone in the doorway. I slept in the guest room that night, though sleep didn't come easily. The house felt like a stranger's, every corner tainted by the weight of what I'd discovered. The next morning, I woke early and went straight to work. Not my job, but the work of uncovering the full truth. I wasn't content to just take her word for anything anymore. If she'd been lying to me for months or years, who was to say she wouldn't keep lying now? I needed answers. Real answers. Her phone, her laptop, her planner. All of it became my evidence. She'd been careful, I'll give her that, but not careful enough. There were text threads she hadn't deleted, emails she'd forgotten to erase. Piece by piece, I started assembling the timeline of her affair. It wasn't just a fling. It had been going on for nearly a year. The worst part? There were moments where I'd been there, right in the periphery, completely unaware. Business trips that coincided with my own late nights at work. A dinner party where she'd snuck out to grab something from the car. Even the vacations we'd taken together. There were messages exchanged with him while I was just steps away. The sheer audacity of it all made my blood boil. By the end of the day, I had enough evidence to bury her in her lies. But as I sat there, staring at the mountain of betrayal laid out before me, I realized something else. This wasn't just about Savannah anymore. It was about me, my life, my choices, and what I was willing to tolerate. I knew I couldn't let this go unaddressed. But I also knew that confronting her wouldn't be enough. I needed a plan. Not for revenge, necessarily, but for closure. Something that would let me walk away from this wreckage with my head held high. That night, I called a lawyer. The call to the lawyer wasn't just practical, it was cathartic. With every word I spoke, every detail I relayed, I felt the weight of the last few days start to shift. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was taking control. And when the lawyer assured me we could proceed swiftly, I knew exactly how I wanted to handle the situation. Savannah had built this house of lies, and now it was my turn to tear it down. The following day, I set my plan into motion. Savannah seemed desperate to talk, hovering near me like a shadow, but I kept my distance. Every interaction was clipped, businesslike. I wasn't giving her the satisfaction of knowing what I was thinking. It wasn't anger she deserved to see. It was indifference, and that indifference unnerved her more than any shouting match ever could. By evening, I was ready. I'd coordinated with the lawyer, gathered all the evidence I needed, and prepared a revelation Savannah wouldn't see coming. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming the narrative. She tried to reduce our marriage to a secret affair, but I wasn't about to let her write the final chapter. I waited until she was settled in the living room, scrolling through her phone as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath her feet. When I walked in, holding a folder stuffed with printed emails, screenshots, and receipts, she looked up, her face pale. "Liam," she started, but I cut her off. "No more lies," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "I know everything." Her eyes darted to the folder in my hand, and she knew. She didn't even try to deny it this time. Instead, she broke into a flood of excuses. How she'd felt neglected, how she'd been unhappy, how it had just happened. I listened, not because I cared, but because I wanted her to exhaust herself. Let her spin her web of justifications. It wouldn't save her. When she finally stopped, I opened the folder and laid the contents on the table between us. The hotel receipts, the emails, the photos, every piece of her betrayal staring back at her. "This," I said, tapping the pile, "is what you've been hiding. This is what you've reduced our marriage to." She sat there, silent, her face a mask of shock and shame. And then I dropped the final bombshell. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said. "The papers are being drawn up. You'll be served by the end of the week." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I could see the panic setting in, the realization that her lies had finally caught up with her. "Liam, please," she said, her voice trembling. "We can fix this." But I shook my head. "There's nothing left to fix, Savannah. You made your choice. Now, I'm making mine." The next moments felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold. Savannah broke down, pleading, crying, promising she'd do anything to make it right. But her words felt hollow, like echoes in an empty room. The woman I'd loved, the life we'd built together, it was all gone. And as I watched her crumble under the weight of her actions, I felt something I hadn't expected: freedom. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe. The betrayal, the lies, the anger, it was all still there, but it didn't own me anymore. I was walking away, not just from Savannah, but from the version of myself that had let this happen. The version that had ignored the red flags, made excuses, and clung to a life that no longer existed. I packed my bags that night, leaving her sobbing on the living room couch. The house, the memories, the remnants of a broken marriage, I left it all behind. As I drove away, the weight lifted with every mile, until all that was left was the open road and the promise of something new. Savannah may have betrayed me, but she didn't break me. If anything, she gave me the push I needed to finally start over. And for that, I was almost grateful. Almost.